Hey, and welcome to the delicious recipe. We're on Thursday here on March 17th. Guess what? It's St. Patty's Day. And I have my lovely guest again here, the one that I always love to have on here, Varla Ventura. How would you like to say hello to everybody?
Hello, happy St. Patrick's Day.
There
Nice to
you
see
go.
you, Dell. Nice to see everyone out there. Thanks for joining us.
So I'm wearing a little bit of green. I got a green shirt on, green hat, and I got Hey You in the background here. He's going to be co-hosting there as well, and it's like a leprechaun sort of type of show, I guess you can say, and actually just even anything mystical because you are the author of Mystical Little Beings.
Yeah, I've got a whole book about fairies, pukas, and changelings. I love to talk about leprechauns. They're actually one of my favorite creatures. They surprised me quite a bit. I had some kind of misconceptions about leprechauns going into writing about them. So I was sort of delighted with some of the things I discovered about them. And I generally love Irish folklore and mythology quite a bit. So, yeah, it's one of my favorite places to travel. Trying to keeping my fingers crossed that all will go well for another trip there this summer. So yeah, just great day to celebrate all of that wonderful Irish folklore and mythology.
Okay, no, the part that I've been looking into there is it's leprechauns, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and they were all cobblers. That's that's the basis of that I got out of anything that I've seen that or people are talking about. But they were also part of the fairy realm.
Yeah, definitely. So leprechauns are part of the fairy realm, and for anyone who's kind of thinking of the fairy kingdom, um, so I think of the fairy kingdom much like one might think of the plant kingdom or the animal kingdom. So it's not just one type of being. So a lot of times people, at least initially, they have fairies they think of like maybe they think of like a Tinkerbell type, or they think of like a specific type of fairy. It's something winged that flies around the garden, and that's kind of like all they think of as fairies. But there's actually many different kinds of creatures that fall into that kingdom of the fae. And in Ireland they might be called like the good people or the little people, and that can encompass leprechauns. Mermaids are considered part of this other kingdom, the kingdom of the fae. Pukas, changelings, brownies. There's like a whole array of creatures, and they all sort of have different attributes. Everything from being tricksters to sort of embodying different aspects of just humanity, really. And as we have the folkloric record, as things evolved and stories were told and retold, you see these creatures kind of evolve in what their representation may be. So, as Christianity was introduced into Ireland, you had
Hmm.
more and more prevalently these creatures were used to sort of teach lessons, usually moral lessons, which doesn't mean that they were like considered amoral or outside of the church, or that you couldn't believe in fairies and not believe in the church, or that the fairies were in conflict with the church, but they were often used as means of like keeping people from walking on the dark roads at night, or staying out at the pub too late drinking, or things like that you you
Right,
really weren't supposed to do. And then occasionally they were also used as a means of control to keep people from cavorting with witches in the dark of the night.
right.
So there certainly were some creatures that were more equated with witchcraft and devilry and things like that as times got a little more intense there
Hmm.
for conversion.
So where did the green come into St. Patty's Day?
So with the leprechaun, well, I mean, green is a color of Ireland. I mean, Ireland itself is the Emerald Isle for a reason. It's green. But with the leprechaun specifically, um, this was one of the things that sort of startled me. So several years ago, when I started writing this book about fairies, I've always loved leprechauns and found the lore fascinating. And my mom used to read to me a lot from like the old folklore like William Butler Yeats. And so I went back to a lot of that to kind of rediscover it as an adult. And I found quite a few passages about leprechauns that sort of led me to one of the things about some of that early recorded Irish literature that like William Butler Yeats did is that he kind of left there's a lot of Easter eggs in there, which I love. There's a lot of Easter eggs in there to previous writers that you can find even more stories. So he'll make reference to some other writers that you can then go and discover, and they'll also make reference to writers prior to them. So you can actually get a little bit further back and further back. And the other great thing is a lot of this stuff is in public domain. So if you can't find, like if you don't have access to a library that has a collection of rare books, or you don't have a collection of rare books, you can go on Gutenberg, Gutenberg.org, which is this amazing online site that has all of these old books scanned, and you can make a donation, or you can just go on it for free, and you can actually like read a lot of those books. Or if you use like an e-reader, you can put them onto your whatever kind of like tablet you have. So I like to try and find the actual books, but you can use it as a reference if you need it, or if you just don't have access to it, or if you need to be able to like, make it a bigger text or something like that. Because that's the other thing, is a lot of these old books are like the typeface on them is just tiny. So I've spent a lot of time in, like when I was researching this book, I still lived in San Francisco, and I would go in the San Francisco Public Library, and I would find like these really old texts, and the typeface would be so tiny, and it would just be this really odd script. And so I would actually look at the one online and compare it just to make sure like I was getting some of the stuff right. But in any case, that's total side rant there.
It's okay.
We were talking about green and leprechauns.
I just love when you go, because you have so much knowledge. You've gone into a lot of this stuff there, and you have such a background. And you know what? And I love any time that I get to talk to you, especially during these holiday seasons that people, I guess, don't know the origins of.
It is in honor of my Irish heritage, and I do have the gift of the gab, so we'll tie that in.
That's perfect there tonight, because I'm under the weather a little bit there. So
yeah, you
just
gave
keep
me
on
permission,
going.
so you might regret that. You might have to give me the signal. But in any case, so I started doing research, and so I went back to some of this stuff, this early Irish literature, recorded literature, sort of from like the Victorian era. And all of a sudden, I'm like, wait a second, this leprechaun is in blue, and this leprechaun is in red. And actually, I started finding all of these parallels to some of the descriptions where the leprechauns aren't in green at all. They're in these luxurious velvet fabrics, many of which are like red and blue. And so there were several characteristics about. Go ahead. I know you're going to.
I know there was something I just watched there today. Is that there was a story of the leprechauns, and a man there, because the leprechaun was the cobbler, and he would do these things, and he would wear silk, and he asked for blue shoes, and he hid his gold out in the leprechaun hid it out there in the field, because this was sort of this arrangement. And then when the guy came back to get his shoes, he figured, oh, they'll be underneath the blue or below the blue shoes. But there was 1,000 blue shoes out there. So then the leprechaun thought, hey, you know what keeps on moving around? A rainbow. And so he went and hid his pot of gold under the rainbow. But that's just one theory out of it. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's just one of the different stories that I heard. But that was the whole part about these blue shoes and fine silks that leprechauns were these.
The love. So, right. There's this like love of luxurious fabrics. So that was like one of the ways that you could ingratiate yourself if you were trying to like woo a leprechaun into giving up their hiding spot, was to like leave these offerings, which I've heard over and over and over again, to like leave offerings for fairies, and they will like show you the way, or they will give you things in return, or they will protect you, all these different kinds of things. And with leprechauns, you're trying to, find the gold. And so they love blues and reds in particular. And in fact, they're frequently depicted in red coats, which then made me start thinking of like the red caps and these like fairies that were known to be on like the edge of the border in between England and Scotland that were known to kind of appear on battlefields, and they wore these like red hats. And then you start just going down this whole kind of like red fairy rabbit hole, and the connection, you're just like, there's this whole other kind of tangent that you can go on. But in any case, that quite surprised me, because I had, of course, always equated leprechauns with like the green coat. And then and I have a couple of like really funny leprechaun stories. But
go ahead.
But as far as the green and the association with the green and the way that we look at a leprechaun now, that really became the iconic leprechaun when there was a large population of Irish immigrants coming, in particular, to the United States around that time. That was kind of what the garb of the Irishmen was like, sort of that hat, the big belt, the waistcoat, that was kind of a stereotypical outfit, and that accent. And then because green was associated with Ireland, that sort of started becoming associated with this leprechaun, which was the most known of the fairy creatures because of the gold legend.
Okay. And so, there's another part that I think we talked about this the last time they were on there. And we talked about that show that Laura and I had watched, American Gods, and they had said that the reason that leprechauns were referred to as being midgets or little people was because they were actually tall, and the church wanted to go and demasculate them.
I was just trying to like make everyone think that they weren't as powerful as they were. I could see that. I mean, the church often would flip things to make them, like holidays appearing on top of other, for example, even St. Patrick's Day falls around the time of Ulster, which is also kind of around the time of Easter, which is a fertility time, which is when things are, I mean, even where I live in Minnesota, I can see the green grass right now, it's like this totally a time of fertility and abundance and renewal.
And lucky for you, I still got about 6 feet of snow outside.
I don't believe it. It's actually like false. It's like I've learned to like not hold on too dearly to the idea of spring this early, but yeah, like in California, it's certainly spring. But then going back to the gold, so the other thing is that like, and I made a point of kind of featuring these leprechaun stories in my book. They weren't end of the rainbow leprechaun stories. They were actually kind of another stash spot. So the pot also was kind of connected with something that you would like cook the pot of porridge. So that was another kind of like iconic thing that may or may not have come from a negative stereotype toward Irish immigrants. I mean, it's difficult to say exactly how that became full of gold. But there was the stash of gold in two of the stories that I have. There's actually a purse, and the purse is like a magic purse that has just like 1 or 2 pieces of gold, but it's always got gold. So it's kind of like a golden store. It could be any number of places. My personal belief is that the end of the rainbow, the end of the rainbow doesn't exist, in case anyone has ever tried to find it.
Right.
I remember being 7 years old and running across a field with my friend, discovering that, it's a refraction of light. It doesn't exist, right? You cannot get to the end of the rainbow. So it's actually an analogy for a certain level of greed in that way.
Yep.
So I don't know if that was something that was added in by the church, or it was just the wise Irishman who was saying, hey, you're never going to find it. Hard work is the only way to make the gold, know?
Right.
Or or you're basically looking in the wrong direction all the time when you're chasing that. You're better off leaving a nice bolt of silk in the forest floor.
Right. The fool always chases after something they can never find.
Yeah, right. Right.
That you go in that analogy, anyways. There's lots of analogies that are out
Yeah,
there about.
yeah, yeah. So, so the story that I love so much, I think I probably told it before. I'm going to tell it again though, because it's St. Patrick's Day, and there's nothing like a good leprechaun story. Because I love this story so much, and interestingly, the later the stories get, like, I would say, like, some of the stories that I've read, especially from, like, I'd say 1915 to like 1930, they're really mean. Like, there's a lot of these, like, capture the fairies and like pummel them. And it's just like, prior to that, I don't see quite as many of those, but there's a little bit more like fear and like you don't want to get caught out. But there's a couple there where like they catch the leprechaun and they're basically just like, poking it and just doing all of these things to it. It was like, if I was the leprechaun, like I would, do everything in my power to ruin that person and make
Right.
sure. But the leprechauns are very, very clever. And they're also, one of their other characteristics, as you said, they're cobblers. So one of the ways to find them is actually to like be very quiet in the forest and listen for the tap, tap, tapping. And the another like characteristic that they have is they tend to be primarily male, and they also tend to kind of like be sort of, they're kind of thought of as like the grumpy bachelor in the woods. So they sort of like to be left alone, but they're kind and they have some generosity, but they don't like to be bothered a lot. And they have their little jobs and things that they do, but like they don't like to be harassed a lot.
So is there any female leprechauns?
I have not come across a female leprechaun story yet. I have found reference to speculation about one, but only in the description of them as primarily bachelors. And I think that wasn't something William Butler Yeats was speculating about based on all of, and his stuff comes from interviews. So he wasn't just like retelling stories. He was going around the Irish countryside. That's like what his whole kind of scholarly works were about, is that he went around the entire island of Ireland and interviewed all the people who were getting older and whose stories were being lost, and who many people of his generation and the next generation didn't care anymore what was happening. And he was going around and he was recording all these stories. And so he's known for being this amazing poet, but he actually really saved the folklore of Ireland, and he really saved these voices, like from completely being, I mean, granted, he told them through, a somewhat, well-to-do, educated voice, but he was an Irish native and he understood what he was doing, and he did it to save that part of his culture. So
awesome.
He's revered for that in Ireland, but throughout the world, he's not as known for that. He's known for being this incredible poet and writer, but he really, that's something that he is completely responsible for. I won't say single-handedly, because there are many people who were doing it and supporting him, but and he was the son of a reverend too.
Well,
His
that's
father was,
that's like the whole thing about St. Patrick. He was a slave. He was taken away and he was put into prison for a while. He was a Christian, and then people didn't realize this, and then later on he was revered afterwards, after he was long dead, for doing stuff. So
isn't that always the way with the saints?
Yeah, so it's
always after
that's
the
sort
fact,
of an interesting story that people don't understand that.
Yeah.
I posted this a little while ago. There was a couple different ones that I posted about St. Patrick, and then the whole part about him driving out the snakes, and there was no snakes in Ireland, but the folklore led into the whole part that there was snakes there. So it was interesting.
Well, I've heard also that the snakes were sort of another way of describing the pagans. Yeah.
People.
Let's just get that very last little bit of paganism out there. But I mean, that's not entirely true either, I think, because
it's murky waters of
yeah.
Okay, okay, I'm gonna ask you another question there. Okay, as we're going on with this, leprechauns, has there been any sort of similar type of leprechaun type identity anywhere else around the world?
So one of the things that I found most interesting was probably like just the mix of, because there are all these different types of creatures that do the same things kind of, but they're called things that are very different. But then on the flip side of that, there's things that are called similar things but do very different things. And so cobblers and coblins and goblins, actually the word origins are quite similar. But a coblin kind of comes more from like the Welsh, which is a different type of sort of it's a Gaelic language, but it's a different language.
Right.
So that kind of there, I found a lot of like similarities in that way. But there's definitely little creatures that guard gold. But I never found anything that was like in the forest making shoes, guarding gold. I mean, leprechauns are incredibly unique in that way,
Right.
and
Yeah.
so special because of that. And they just, they have the nice clothes. They're also kind of like sometimes depicted as being like a little bit. I've seen pictures of them, drawings of them where they look ratty. They're not ratty. They're like nice things.
Yeah, nice clothes.
Yeah, they like nice things. They take care of things. They make nice things for others. Like fairies are well dressed. Like they have it. It's a magical kingdom. They didn't just like beat around in like rags. That's just not how they roll.
Yeah, I see. So this almost sort of sounds sort of similar. I know it's not the same thing, but dragons of Asia that they hoard their gold, and they are beautiful beasts and stuff like that. But now you're talking about a big thing that's like
and
a
like maybe a
lizard
cave
snake.
or something like that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so there's definitely some creatures, and like you can get a little bit more into the like the Tommy knockers and the like that type of thing that guard openings to the ground, and like large things that are kind of like like larger kind of openings into the earth, like those kind of creature guardians that are not, I'm not talking about dragons specifically, but like gnomes or whatever. There's like a lot of sort of earth fairies, like I said before, when I think of them as like the kingdom of fairy, I kind of classify them and I get this, I mean, this is how William Butler Yeats does it, so that's probably where my initial idea of how their fairy kingdom works. And he's got a few other kind of, he's got like his trooping fairies, which are the ones that like march around, but I kind of think of it as like woodland dwelling. You got your mer fairies, the mermaids and such, and then you've got your the ones that like run amok in meadows, and the ones that like live down in caves and such.
Right.
Okay, so now I have to tell this. I got to tell this leprechaun story because it's really funny.
Yes. Go ahead, because I was going to ask you a question about Snow White and the Seven Dwarves there. And
so I've actually that's a good question, because were you going to ask about like do dwarves guard diamonds and stuff? Is that what you were going to ask?
Yeah.
I mean,
like Disney did a lot of old folklore. He changed around the original stories a lot to make it more kid friendly, because the stories
or
are actually,
did they? I mean, I don't know.
they're actually nasty.
Some of it's traumatizing.
Ooh, like I mean, I remember one of the girls there that I went to school with her. She did a whole thing on about the Disney folklore fairy tales, and she talked about the original stories, and it says like this is something you would never ever read to a kid. Like you'd never ever want to put this on print.
I mean, honestly, if you think about like just like Sleeping Beauty is basically like all about like non-consensual. It like actually there's this podcast that is all about it's all about like it's actually Celtic tales retold, and it's this it's called Candlelit Tales. It's wonderful. And
awesome.
It's retold Celtic tales by a brother and sister, and it's one of the ones they did, which is unrelated to specifically Irish only. They retell Sleeping Beauty, and it's they modernize it like as if it were to happen today, and it is It's not safe for kids is all I'll say. It's gnarly. It's really gnarly.
Dave Petrella had a question there. Are there leprechauns in North America?
I mean, there very well may be. I kind of feel like there's definitely
a lot of lore came over with the old people that they came across the boat.
Lore that came over. There's also a lot of there are a lot of little people in indigenous and first people belief. There's a lot about small people that live in the forest that require offerings that will allow you entry. Whether I don't know those stories specifically enough to compare them one by one to leprechauns, but there's certainly like a lot of crossover, and I think there's definitely like fairy-like creatures that dwell around in the area, certainly enough to, worth making offerings for. And also, again, like the fairy kingdom is this, like, I don't want to quite say it's like a parallel dimension, but it is a coexisting dimension. And like, if they can just like, whatever, like pass through a rock cave and go into their realm, which is coexisting with ours, and there's a whole other relationship with time and space, I don't know if it really matters what continent they're on. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I just think there's like certain places in the world where there
the
are
door.
Yeah, where there's greater portals.
Yeah.
So, there just might be specific types of creatures that like certain areas more.
Well, that comes into an interesting question. I'm going to let you get back to your story there about the part
it's
you were talking
going
about.
to be a teaser. It's just going to keep people. They're going to.
But the thing is that this goes in through a lot of Native American lore, because this is the part that I've been looking into for about 3 years about little people and Bigfoot and all these things. But it's Native Americans talk about these creatures, that they actually dealt with these, and that went globally all around, and they talk about them going through portals or going through disappearing out of time and space. And then you had this whole thing with that David Plaitis missing 411, where all these people just sort of disappeared off the planet, and sort of and just went missing. And so these are all interesting questions, and I don't know.
I literally I'll have to tell you, like, my son, who is 11, the other night, he just, you expect your kids to kind of be like, oh, I don't know, I'm just upset I have to go back to school, or this is too much homework, this is bumming me out. The other night, my son he breaks down and he just says, I don't understand time. And I just said, you know what? Me either. He's like, I don't get it. All this time goes by and it just feels so long. And then there's this other time, and you're just like, I just don't get time. And I was like, I mean, what do you say? And I was like, really? We're going to have an existential conversation at 9:15? Like, I don't even know where to go with this. I'm like, this is something I save for podcasts after you're in bed, buddy. But it's true. And I was like, wait till you get into parallel dimensions. Then you're going to like totally lose it, kid. Like, this is going to be too much.
I just posted something about this before there. It says, it's unbelievable. I said, I go to sleep or take a nap right after I'm done work. I sleep for about 2 hours, and I live the whole day, and I wake up and I still got the whole day still to go. And I'm like,
power nap.
I'm still.
I love those.
I'm still on Monday, and like, and I was like, oh geez, and I just lived the whole day in my mind going to sleep.
Or what about the fact that time in the morning is totally different than time in the evening, right? Like time when you have to get somewhere and you're, like you have an appointment, the 20 minutes leading up to that appointment is totally different than the 20 minutes after that appointment. Totally different 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It just is. It's the same 20 minutes in theory, but it's different 20 minutes.
Yeah. Well, it's because
like, how do you explain that?
Well, it's because the anticipation and
it's a mindset.
It's just the mindset. I think that's my own theory on it. You can totally decide on your own there, but I know
It's
that
not. It's a tough convo.
I'll
It's
tell you
like,
that
really?
I'll tell you when you hit that snooze button there, that 9 minutes when that thing goes off is the most beautiful 9 minutes you'll ever
Oh
have.
my God! It's the greatest dreams ever of all time.
Yes.
That's the swimming with mermaids moments right there.
Okay, so go into your story there that you were gonna do there, since
Oh yeah,
I
okay. So make sure
distracted
we
you
have
so
time
many
for it.
times here.
Okay, let's make. I forgot it. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so I think that I've got three mermaid stories, three leprechaun stories in my book, and this is my favorite of all the three. So this one is the story about this man who works really, really hard. And oh wait, no, that's the other. Okay, so this is a story about. Okay, there's three, and this is my second favorite one. No, this is my favorite one. Okay, so this man he is walking through the forest, and he actually manages to he sees a leprechaun, and instead of trying to beat him or whatever, he just he kind of comes up upon him, and he manages just to kind of like trick him, and he just sort of captures the leprechaun, kind of catches him unawares. And the leprechaun says, "Oh, if you let me go, just let me go, and I will give you," he says, "nope, you have to show me your golden store." And actually, what's interesting about this and one of the other stories in there is he never says, "Show me your pot of gold." He says, "I want your golden store." And he says, "No, well, you know what? If you let me go, just let me go, and I'll tell you what, I'll give you this purse." "No, I don't know. I'll give you this purse, and this is a magic purse. And I'll tell you what, this purse is so magic that only has one gold coin, but it always has one gold coin.
Ooh,
and it'll
okay.
never run out. So every time you take a gold coin out, there'll be another gold coin in there."
I've heard something similar to this story.
This is the leprechaun's magical golden purse. You might have heard this story from me, to be honest, Del, but you humor me because it's St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
But the leprechaun's golden or magical purse is actually recurring in many, many leprechaun stories, actually more prevalent than even the pot of gold. The pot of gold is kind of like a more modern thing.
Mm-hmm.
Incidentally, sidebar, there is a museum of the leprechaun in Dublin that I've never been to, and I expect it probably tells you about the whole dang history of how leprechaunism has evolved.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
So
and it's in Dublin.
It's in Dublin, Ireland. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
next time I'm there, I'll go to it. Then I'll report back.
Okay, perfect.
So what does he do? He says, "Okay," and he lets the leprechaun go. He, I've got the golden purse, and he goes straight down the pub, and he goes down the pub. "Everybody order up on me. Everything's on me. Everybody get a drink on me. Everybody dinner on me." So they do, of course. They get all the drinks. They get all that. Everybody's just having a merry time, merry time, merry time. They order up, drink up. Hooray, hooray, hooray. Drinks on Johnny, or what? I can't remember the guy's name in the story. I have the book here, but I'm too lazy to look it up. So they drink up, and then the time comes to pay up. And so he very proudly reaches in and he grabs the purse, and he reaches in, and it's got this one beautiful golden coin. And he reaches in and he puts it down on the counter so proudly, and he shows it to the barkeep, and she looks at him and says, "Well, that's not enough." And he reaches in to pull the other one out, and it's empty.
Right.
And the whole place just starts laughing and laughing and laughing at him because he completely got fooled over by the leprechaun, and he could have had the whole golden store, but he took the purse because he's a fool, and then he had to wash dishes, and then the whole town made fun of him for the rest of his life. And that's it. That's the story, and it's just this great story,
Right.
That's
I guess that's I guess if you go it, I guess it's sort of almost like these Bible stories and
like
things that are like that. Yeah. Well, just telling you stories
drinking
about life lessons and about chasing after something.
Yeah.
And then you make the wrong decision thinking that you're getting the best out of it, right?
But it's kind of funny because the moral of that story was what, though? What's the moral of that story? You should have chased the leprechaun? right? Like
Or maybe you should have thought better before picking
buying
something.
everyone's drinks. You should have pulled the coin out first. Like that's
Yeah,
probably
look, because
yeah.
I think that one that one went into that TV show that Laura and I, American Gods, and I can't remember what the guy's name was, Finney something, or I can't remember, but he had the one golden coin, and it was a lucky golden coin, and it would always reciprocate another coin.
Yeah.
And when he gave it away, it actually got lost into a girl that died, and that actually caused her to become live again. So if
Oh,
anybody wants to check out this
was
TV
that Finn
show, it's called
McCool?
American Gods, and there's 2 seasons of it. And this coin was the whole thing, was that he was the leprechaun, and he was like 6'8", and
Oh,
the thing was is that was the part that I was
strapping
saying, is that
leprechaun.
the church made them, they put the story out there that they were these tiny little midget people, right? That they were weak and stuff like that, when actually they were a big, strong tribe. And when the church came in to go and overtake
Because the church
Ireland,
wanted the gold, you know. That's
yeah,
what they, yeah.
yeah. But
Okay, so
that
sorry.
was the
So
whole
my
story.
my second favorite story, and I
Okay,
won't
yep.
get into the whole story, but it's really funny because it's about this town, and you have to understand that I had to like, here this is the book, right? This is how thin it is, right? So I had to I had a specific word count.
Hmm.
It's only
Yes, show that up.
um
Put the thing there so
Here's
people
what
can see it there that are
it,
watching. There
everything's
you
backwards.
go. Yeah.
Fairies, pugas, and changelings, and
Yes.
a complete guide to the wild and wicked enchanted realm. And it's
Hmm.
even got a little. It's all backwards here, but it's got a little guy on the spine there. And the section, so it has all these different sections, and so I couldn't go wild with leprechauns. I had to kind of like narrow it down.
Yep.
And so I had to choose 4 or 5 things. And I had like so much leprechaun stuff. And so I was trying to choose things that I thought were a little unusual that people hadn't heard before. And
Hmm.
so one of the other ones that just made me, I picked stuff that just made me laugh. And so this other one that made me laugh so hard was this one where this guy basically works really hard. And this is what I was going to tell before. He works really hard and he doesn't drink. And he works really hard and he prospers really well. Like he works his fields and he sells his crops and he prospers. He does fairly well. He's not a rich man, but he does well. And so the whole town just thinks that he's in cahoots with the leprechaun and they don't like him and they hound him and they constantly ask him where the leprechaun's gold is. And he
Hmm.
won't tell them because he's not in cahoots with the leprechaun, so he claims.
Right.
And so instead of just like respecting him for like being a hard worker, they don't trust him because he doesn't go down the pub, and 2
Yeah.
think he's holding out on them because he is doing well.
Right.
So he's like totally ostracized for like doing the right thing, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Hmm.
And so I just think that one's really funny because the moral is completely like turned on its head, right? Because
Yeah.
in this case, the moral is, go down the pub and share your knowledge of the leprechaun, or
Right.
you're gonna like not fit in.
Well, that comes into this whole idea of tribalism, right? If
Oh, totally. Yeah,
like,
right.
yeah, and
It
that
does.
happening right now. There, period, in today's culture. So
Sure
where
it
does
is. Sure it
where,
is.
so where does Rumpelstiltskin fit into this?
Oh, that's funny. I actually have Rumpelstiltskin in this book. I included it
Now, is he a
because
leprechaun, or is he a dark elf, or is he a fairy, or what?
so I included him. He is actually in kind of. I included him in that category a little bit because he does have this ability to. He's got the connection with gold.
Hmm.
He's also got the trickster. So I included him, I believe, in the section with trickster fairies
Okay.
because though he appears to help, he has an ulterior motive. So he has the ability to help. He could just help. He could just spin that straw into gold
Hmm.
with no other motive other than to help. Or he
Right.
could have asked for something not super crazy like the firstborn child.
Right.
But instead, he requires a pretty big price. But his name has to be guessed, right? So there's that whole element of it. So there's a real kind of like, I think there's actually sort of a mix of a few different legends probably in there. And if I remember right, doesn't he appear when she prick? I think there's some blood involved. I think there's a little blood that invokes him, if I remember right, at least in one of the original tales.
On the part, on the finger, the blood comes out there because she's tasked with the task of
she's trying to spin this straw into gold, and it's just like this ridiculous thing. There's a lot happening in that story too, because first of all, she has to prove herself worthy, which is utterly ridiculous.
Right.
To
get married, right?
Just to get married to some dude that she doesn't even want to get married to. Right. So she's basically, and she's locked up in something with this ridiculous task, and basically just like, it's like her parents like say, oh, you got to marry this guy. I mean, she's just like, she has no say. So again, like you could write an entire book on the lack of consent in fairy tales and you would still have leftover material.
That's like the Rapunzel one there. She's locked up in a tower and her hair just gets
and then she puts her hair down, and she doesn't even want to do that either. It's just like, man, kind of, can't win in that situation.
So, so who originated through your research? Who originated most of these stories? Like you said, like Yeats was the one that went and looked into them there, but who originated most of these stories?
Well, I think, you've got a wide range of stories. But with a lot of the Celtic stories, you have stories from Celtic creation stories. So you have stories from the Celtic belief system that have been passed down in oral tradition, not unlike First People's stories that are passed down in an oral tradition. And then eventually someone writes them down, probably ill records them in some fashion.
Right.
The Irish have a tradition of storytelling, and it's a tradition that involves reinventing the story every time it's told. And that is not in a negative way, but every time, because there's a tradition of storytelling, it's storytelling. It's meant to be retold around a structure that is similar. So if you're retelling some of the great, Celtic folklore and origin stories, there's specific pillars, and you may retell it so that a child will understand it, or you may retell it so that it's modernized for a modern audience. Or you can take a story that you've heard someone tell and sort of kind of change it around a little bit.
Add a little flavor to it.
Yeah, a little pinch of this and a little pinch of that. But many of the stories come, like, for example, Yeats's the original title for one of his collections of stories, and I don't know that he meant this in as snobby of a way as it comes across, but it was fairy and folk tales of the Irish peasantry. So these were the tales of the people who couldn't write.
What was that? Okay. Yep.
Does he agree?
Yeah, he agrees with you.
Yeah. And it was not unlike the way the Grimm brothers were recording the fairy and folk tales of the people who couldn't write. But I want to say this, there's a caveat here. These are written stories. Okay, these are stories written by people who could write at the time. And the people who could write at the time and who could afford to travel around and write at the time were usually educated white men who often worked for the church. And so there was a very specific worldview. And that was not always that was not always a worldview that took into account what the world was really like, right?
Right.
So then you have built upon that more and more and more like bias, and so everything you read, you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt, and you have to just sort of understand. For example, I found this. I was telling you earlier, it's kind of serendipitously, I got this, I subscribed to this magazine called Archaeology Ireland.
Yep.
And
Oh yeah, you showed me the picture. Show everybody the picture there.
yeah, so this is really great. Now I have to say this is not my discovery. So I'll credit the people whose discovery it is, of course. But in come here, glasses. In Ireland, I just couldn't believe that on the day that I was going to be on your show, because if people don't know this, I also wrote a book about mermaids. Where is it?
Yep.
Okay, Among the
That
Mermaids.
way. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, this is my copy, so it has red stuff on there. Doesn't all of them don't look like that. Anyway, there's an article in here by Colin O. Sorry, I'm going to apologize to the authors right now. Colin O'Driscoll and Jim Higgins, and it looks like Jim Higgins has actually done quite a bit of research on Irish mermaids. So, going to be looking up all those books and articles. Anyway, a carved stone. Oh, this is so great! You're not even going to believe the name of the church. It's called St. Patrick's Church.
Oh, hoo-hoo. Hey,
I know.
That even
in
comes
Waterford.
Comes into the whole part of the show.
Full circle. Okay. So a Renaissance era mermaid carving was discovered in St. Patrick's Church in Waterford, and they just discovered it very recently, and I can show you the drawing here. But I just want to tell you a couple things about it. It's different than any other carving of any mermaid that they've found in Ireland. There's been about 10 found in various abbeys and churches and tombs throughout Ireland. This one is, let's see. So this one is depicted with holding bells. So all of the other ones in Ireland, they are depicted holding a comb and a mirror. And they think that represented in the church's vanity, like a sin against like vanity. Mm-hmm. This one is holding bells, so that's incredibly unique. Now, there are other ones around the world where mermaids are holding bells or instruments, but this is the only one they found in Ireland so far. So
how would a bell work underwater?
Mermaids are magical creatures, so let's see.
Okay. Yeah. No, I just find it interesting there.
Don't question the magical creatures. Okay. Come on, you saw the Little Mermaid. They got a whole band under there.
That's right.
Just the way a coconut. Okay.
That's like them finding coconut fibers on up at what's that, the Oak Island, like in Coconut
Tree. Oh my God!
Tree.
Don't you love that show? It's like they're gonna find something. But you're also kind of like, are they gonna find something? How many more seasons?
No, they'll never find anything.
They found everything. Okay, so wait. It depicts about, okay, so let me just read you and then I'll show you the picture.
Okay.
So it depicts about 2/3 of a hybrid fish bird mermaid, her wings spread behind her head in what may be an elaborate headdress attached to the upper part of a frame. The hair, face, and breasts of the mermaid are quite crudely incised, and the top of the scaled tail is just visible toward the base of the body. The bulbous tail terminals on either side of the body indicate that the mermaid originally had a bifurcated tail, which means a split tail. Mm-hmm. So that is another thing that's very unusual. Most of the mermaids in Ireland have the single tail. So the bifurcated tail is something that is depicted in mermaids in other places, like in Rome and France and places like that, but not in Ireland. So in any case, let me start showing you some of the pictures. So here's the carving, which you're not going to be able to see much of because
go that way. Yep, right there.
Okay, so that's very hard to see. But then let me show you the drawing, and there's a more detailed drawing too. So that's just the top.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's not great. But let me show you the one that
and for
beautiful illustrator did.
For anybody out there just listening on audio, you can check us out on YouTube and you can see all these pictures.
And also you can subscribe to Archaeology Ireland, and the issue is volume 36, number 1, spring 2022. And I subscribed to it, and it's not super expensive. And they sent me you only get 4 a year. It's not really, really costly, and they're quite quick in sending it to you. You can just Google Archaeology Ireland, and you'll you'll be able to get it. And it's wonderful. It's totally a scientific magazine, but it's just incredible what you get in there. So then let me just show you. I'm going to do one more little picture here that this woman did a beautiful drawing of, so you can see the mermaid right there. What they
Okay.
I'm sorry about the. Let me just get the backwards thing better. That's not it. That's not it. That's not it. Other way. Other way. Come on, Varla. Come on. Other way. Okay. There.
Yep.
There we go. So you can see the bifurcated tail,
Yep.
which is going both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. There we go.
Awesome.
So that's pretty remarkable. They just discovered that they were like doing a remodel, and they found this slate, and someone said, wait a minute, there's something on there. And they started kind of like lightly cleaning it. And lo and behold,
We got somebody that was a drawer back then, or an artist that spent time to draw a picture of something that they might have saw, or something that came out of their imagination, right? Because you have to sort of play it both ways there, right?
well, they actually think that, well, what was really, I actually learned quite a few things in this, this Higgins person. I need to get their book, because they had a lot of information about what they speculated the mermaids were there for, specifically in the churches.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't entirely sure why this one was there, but like the bifurcated tails, like that was supposed to be like against lust. And it's hilarious. It's like literally like a woman with her legs spread holding it open, but it's like with scales. It's just like, you guys are so obvious what you're doing. Like, nice try. Just cover it up with some scales. No one will know.
Okay, well, Varla, we got less than 1 minute. We got less than 1 minute.
Oh, you don't want to leave it on that note.
We'll end it off with that. We'll cover it up with some scales.
Cover it up
on
with
this
scales.
green day of March 17th.
Yes.
So tell them where they can go and find you, and
come harass me.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, varlaventura.net is my website, and that's where I'll be. I appear here occasionally. I'm on Dave's show once a month. And yeah, that's about it. Just kind of hanging out.
Awesome. And this is the delicious
Thanks for having
recipe.
me.
Oh, I love every time that you come on there. You make my day better there, even when I'm feeling ill. So
I'll send you my recipe for cold cannon. That'll be your delicious recipe.
Oh, awesome. That sounds great. And this is Delicious Recipe. We're here on UPRN, and we'll see you all next Thursday.